Okay, so welcome to VR Underwater Fishing. Episode 1 is all about Tench, all things Tench. And in this episode, this is an underwater podcast style film where we basically take Colin Allchin from the Tenchfishers community. He's going to talk us through the observations that I made at Farlows Lake, where I had tench in feeding, basically for 2 weeks. He's going to talk to us about rigs, tactics, and his observations, and yeah, hopefully you enjoy this. So I just want to say thanks to Colin. Unfortunately, there was another gentleman involved in the podcast, but he had some mic problems, so we've had to kind of cut him out and edit him out. But yeah, any questions you've got in Tench, drop us a message, let us know your thoughts, and yeah, enjoy. You're going to see more Tench underwater footage in the next 35 minutes than there probably is in the whole of the internet, so yeah, enjoy.
If there's an obvious feature, from a quick look at the first scene from your video, that looks like a sort of gravel bar or gravel hump at fairly short range. It's got partial weed coverage. It looks a bit gravelly, a bit stony, but it's certainly fishable with most of the rigs that we would fish. It's quite steep in parts. It looks like it's relatively narrow across the top. I can't really get a sense of scale from it.
So yeah, basically what happened with that spot was that when we arrived, we basically found a long spot, which I'll show you, which was a bit more kind of choddy, if you like, right?
Yeah.
And the short spot was that there was little patches of gravel, and basically what we ended up doing, I'm just going to start sharing the footage just now. What we basically started doing was we raked it to make it an actual obvious kind of 8 to 10 foot gravel spot. There was a slight depression, so it was almost like a carp hole type thing with the gravel, with the weed all around it, which kind of helped to like disguise the camera. So we deliberately made one spot very polished and clear and clean and obvious, and then we kind of made the second spot. Right, there we go. So that's the footage. Are you seeing the footage now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we made right. So this is it now, showing you the short spot when the fish first moved in. So you'll see that was at night. That was first thing in the morning, just before it got dark. We basically dumped the camera on the Sunday, put a load of bait in, didn't fish it, and on the Monday morning, this was just before it got light. You could see that the tench were in and they were absolutely having it off. Now, this footage here, and this is what I really wanted to share with you guys, because I found this very, very, very interesting, and I'm not sure how much, we are aware, because this actually happened with the carp as well, right? So you've got this polished, clean, obvious, bare spot with all of this bait, but then on the right-hand side, there was this, the little kind of candy floss weed. It seemed to snag up the maggots. And in this footage here, you'll see that these tench just kept coming back to it, and they would not eat off the clear spot. And again, this is an interesting point where if you were to cast out, and when you reeled your rig in, there was a little bit of weed on it, you would maybe move your rig slightly and try and avoid the weed. That's what we're kind of taught, as carp anglers, to, try and find these obvious clear spots. But having watched the footage, I think the fish are more than aware that there's a higher probable chance that they're going to get caught in the clear spot than they are in this kind of candy floss weed. And you'll see these fish just keep coming back. And I think 6 times in a row, they come in and they feed from the weed. So I was just curious to know how you guys approach fishing for tench in the weed.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with Phil there, because that is an awful lot of bait, and I don't think these look like sort of dead reds and corn and bits of boilie and all sorts of stuff, and we wouldn't typically start a session off with that amount of bait.
Yeah,
it's quite. Feeder fishing is probably the most common technique to fish for tench these days. You would have heard about the worm kebab. Well, the worm kebab is probably used by 2/3 of tench anglers these days, and it's highly effective. We catch lots of tench on it. We also catch a considerable number of carp on it. Quite often more carp than the carp anglers.
Yeah,
and it's a natural bait, and we're generally using natural baits as well. But we wouldn't normally start off with this amount of solid bait. You might put in a couple of mini spods with sort of small pellets, sort of 2-4 mil pellets, 2 to 3 mil pellets, because you want the fish moving around. You don't want to present them with a large volume of bait, and you don't want a lot of bait to sit there uneaten. So, though you won't know, I don't think you know, correct me if I'm wrong, when most of these tench appeared on this spot. So, I mean, can you give me an idea of how long that bait was there before the tench arrived?
So to give you the time frames and the volumes of bait, right? So I was a tench angler, like I said, 25 years ago, right? And I was also a match angler for carp.
Yeah.
And you're right, you would never start off with a kilo and a half of bait.
Yeah.
What's interesting is obviously we were carp fishing, right? And the tench came in and started feeding, and the carp didn't. These tench were coming in every day, probably 2 hours before it got dark, and roughly, and they were feeding until it got dark and through the night. And then when we were turning the cameras on in the morning, they were still there feeding. And they would feed, when I turned the cameras on about 5:30 in the morning, they would feed till about 8 o'clock every morning. So it's similar, first thing in the morning, last thing at night, generally. Now,
what time of year was this, John?
So this was recorded about a month ago.
Right, okay.
So end of April, right?
That's a tench with a rig in its mouth, is it?
Yeah, that's a fish with a rig in its mouth, yeah. What was happening was, what's interesting is they didn't turn up like this, right? What would happen is it would get to like 5:30. When was it dark? I'm trying to think when it got dark back then, right? But they would turn up 2.5 hours before it got dark. One tench would come in. That one tench would turn into 3, and then it would turn into 7, and then it would turn into 11, and they would feed like this. During the day, it was just the odd tench ghosting pass. Occasionally, it would drop down and grab a mouthful and away. But 99% of the feeding was first 2.5 hours and last 2.5 hours.
Yeah. I mean, this is really interesting, the way they graze on this silkweed.
Yeah.
Because that's how you think tench feed all the time. They're not spooky. They look quite calm and relaxed, to be sort of a bit anthropomorphic. They're taking their time.
Yeah.
They're not desperately hungry. Clearly, there's a lot of food there, and they're just browsing in the weed because that's probably the substrate they would normally feed over.
Yeah.
The fact that you've got sort of a kilo or more of mixed particles sitting out in the open is, as your carp angler would say, that's very blatant.
Yeah.
You know, and they probably do not feel comfortable over that substrate with that amount of food, especially when there's some sort of overspill into the weedy area. If you look at is that your camera footplate there? So so you've got a mixture of weed with some bait in it, and they're quite happy over that bit.
Yes.
But if you go to the clearer bits where there's more bait, less weed, they're less happy.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite characteristic.
What was interesting,
we could fish over this quite easily.
Yeah. But what's interesting is we were putting wafters on the weed, right?
Yeah.
They wouldn't touch it. They wanted to burrow in. Now, obviously, as carp anglers, we are taught to feel for the drop, get that donk on the lead when it hits the lake bed. But based on what I've seen here, like, we had a wafter out for 5 days. It never got picked up once with a tench. We had a pop-up out, and it got picked up once, which I'll show you later on. And I think it was picked up by accident. I actually don't think the tench. So here's our rig presentation.
Yeah.
Right, whereby the wafter, which was like 2 little bits of pink corn, and I think half a dozen maggots on the top, they would not take it off the surface. They wanted to nose right into and burrow almost into the weed in order to suck the bait out. Now, in terms of the different baits, we had corn, we had boilies, we had pellet, and we had maggot. And a lot of tench anglers have asked me what was their favourite bait. And for me, they didn't distinctly pick out corn or anything. It was the ones that got snarled up in the weed. That's what they loved. They loved to burrow in and suck them off.
That's just habit. That's how they like to feed. That's where if you weren't putting in that food, they would be in the weed looking for invertebrates and so on.
But what is interesting as well, and I was curious to get your take on it, in a lot of cases, they seem to spit out like 90% of what they left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's times where I've actually froze the frame and counted, and I'm like, well, they've picked up that fish has picked up like 8 maggots, 3 bits of corn, and a boilie. And then when it goes to eject the bait, it seems to eject more than it picked up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it might well have done. I mean, it's perfectly possible.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's that's where were you using any sort of flavors on any of this bait, or were these just maggots and corn?
No, at one point we did try the mainline smart liquid, but I can't say that. What I did find interesting was if you put the bait in during the day, they will come in and feed on it all night, like last thing at night, through the night, and first thing in the morning. If you got up first thing in the morning, say you got up at 6 o'clock and most of the bait was gone, if you topped up the spot with bait, they wouldn't feed on that new bait. They were almost spooked off the new bait.
And this was at Farlows, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's quite I think I might have fished there once about 35 years ago, but I think it's quite a busy pressure day ticket carp water now, isn't it? Basically. Yeah. I mean, and what do carp anglers do? I mean, they bait up first and last thing, don't they?
Yeah.
I mean, I fish at Linear every so often. Last couple of trips have been to Tenchfishers fishings there, and we had one bank. There's a group of us on a regional social fishing. We had one bank of one of the pits, and carp anglers were fishing the other one. And it's like, when they eventually get up about 6 or 7 o'clock, when the tench anglers have already been up for 3 hours, one of the first things they do if they've not had a run in the night is reach for the spawn.
Yeah.
And they automatically assume, oh, well, there can't be any bait out there. And it's quite a predictable scenario. And you hear a lot of carp anglers now, it's becoming sort of quite the thing. In fact, I was watching a Gary Bayes video last night, the Nash bait guy, before Nash bait folded. And, he was talking about this business about washing out baits and what they have to do to sell a carp bait. And they have to sort of overload it with attractors that are attracting the carp anglers. They're not there to attract fish because they can't sell dull fish meals that doesn't smell of anything other than a fish meal.
Yeah.
They want the bright pinks and the whites and the yellows that smell of overpoweringly strong fruity flavors.
Yeah.
And they're just finding more and more on pressured waters where using a small bright pop-up is sort of the go-to method in the spring. The fish just wise up to it. Yeah. And these tench are...
In my experience, and I've not proved it yet, but the best bait for carp is pellet.
Yeah, because that's how they're fed on from day naught.
First of all,
these are farmed fish.
Yeah, they're farmed fish, so they've got
5
years living off of only pellet. And the second reason is, how many carp anglers put a pellet on their hair rig? None.
Well, that's right. And also, the other thing is, the only time carp anglers tend to use natural baits is in the winter when they go over to the maggot. And lots of fisheries ban maggots, or they restrict the use of maggots now because the carp anglers, even in the winter, just can't help themselves and put out kilo of maggots. And they're not particularly nutritious for the fish, and they're worried about the health of the fish.
Yeah.
But invariably, and it happened to our last fishing where we had carp anglers on one bank and tench anglers on the other bank, we were picking up far more carp on worm and caster and maggot than they were on their little bright pink boilies that most of them are fishing. It's a conditioning thing, and I think if you put up a sort of either a popped up worm, a dendrobina, or a small lobworm, either popped up with a little bit of foam or air injected, so it's just sort of 2 or 3 inches sat on top of the silkweed, that would pretty much guarantee you, off of that baited area, in that marginal area where you've got the tench seemingly happy to feed.
So see that shot here, right? I don't know if you're seeing it, but the fish is coming in and the wafter's sitting on the top, right? So
Yeah.
what you're saying is you would pop up a worm on top of the weed.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, like, do you not think that's wrong based on my footage? Because they
Well,
did.
not on top of it. I mean, that wafter's not really, well, it's wafting above the weed, but with a worm bait, it's, I don't want to use all these carpy terms all the time, but more sort of critically balanced.
Yeah.
So you can try and get it. This looks like quite shallow water. Is that
Yes, it
right?
is.
On top of it, yeah.
Yeah.
So it only looks 2 or 3 foot deep, and this sort of is probably a bit silted. Horseshoe. I don't know if you know Horseshoe at all.
Yeah.
The main tench producing area is an area called Summer Bay, and most of it is 2 to 4 foot deep.
So this is the bite. This is the bite that we got, which I actually think was an accident.
Oh
Right?
yeah.
And you'll see that this tench has actually got its mouth jammed open.
About 30 seconds ago, before the camera started to pan round, there was that tench. Well, these small white boilies that they're picking up, they're like 10 mil
Yeah, they were
boilies.
10 mil ISO sweet boilies, the new mainline boilies.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's quite interesting because you were talking about this sucking and blowing.
Yeah, you'll see it here. It goes back to the boilies.
Yeah.
It hoovers up like 7 or 8 at one point.
Yeah. And in a way, he's, or she, I can't say, he's just testing. And I think carp anglers and other anglers often get confused between olfaction and gustation and attractants. So they may well, as Phil has suggested, they're not. I don't believe tench are massive sight feeders. You just look at the size of the eye compared to a carp. I mean, it's quite a small eye. I think they are big feeders relying on their other sensory organs. So you've got attractants and olfaction. So this is what they're smelling in the water and they're smelling around the bait. So that's like ticks one of their boxes. And they might then suck that in to test it using gustatory sensitivity. So in the mouth and around the mouth area. And that's a different set of sense organs. So you've got the primary trigger. You think, well, it could be. Looks a bit like food, smells a bit like food. I'll taste it, takes it into its mouth, and then he either doesn't like the feel of it or he doesn't like the taste of it, and then just blows it out.
Yeah.
It's just testing it all the time. There are lots of examples where we can smell something and it smells quite nice, but you put it on your tongue and the taste is completely different to the smell.
Yeah, but the thing
that
didn't work out, Colin, was that, like, I was seeing tench going down and taking a mouthful. There was pellet, there was maggot, there was corn, there was a boilie, a crumbed up boilie. And then when it was coming out, it was ejecting everything. So in that situation, do you think there's one thing that the fish is trying to eject it doesn't like? Or is it just...
Yeah, well, it's basically, yeah, I mean, the way and what might confuse it is actually the difference in size and the texture of the bait. So you've got dead red maggots, which are soft.
Yeah.
You've got a relatively hard, round boilie, which is a completely different size. So when they take in a mouthful of bait, they then salt that bait, and they're deciding based on both gustation how it tastes to them in those mouth senses, and also I'm pretty sure they're salting depending on physical feel as well, because these fish are used to feeding, generally speaking, on softer body invertebrates, bloodworm and so on. They will take snails and small crustacean, but their pharyngeal teeth are much smaller than a carp. There's a limit to what they can pick up and crush. Obviously, a big tench can take up snails and small mussels and maybe even crayfish, I don't know. But these fish are not hungry. It's like they're presented with a smorgasbord of food and they're just picking. And because they're not hungry, they don't really need to feed looking at them. They're just picking. And it's like you visiting a sort of all-you-can-eat table and saying, well, I'm just going to go for the tasty bits and I'll try that, but yeah, that's okay, but I'll rather eat some of that. And they're just rejecting it because they're not especially hungry. They're just being really picky. But they might also be doing it because they can suck in. I think sometimes they suck in more bait into their mouth. They can actually pass on to the pharyngeal teeth. And for the pharyngeal teeth to work, they can't pass it all down at once. If you look at the mouth is obviously a much bigger organ than the throat and the pharyngeal area. So they need some room to move that bait around, sort out what they're going to pass back to the pharyngeal teeth. And I think sometimes that means they need to eject some of that bait that doesn't meet their criteria. So they may be selectively picking up what might seem a mouthful of bait, but they may hold back half a dozen of the maggots, for example, and just expel the rest because it's too much like hard work. They're not. They're being fussy.
Do you know what's really interesting, Colin? Right, so see this clear spot here, right? Yeah. For 4 days, they wouldn't feed, not properly on that clear spot. And on the second last day, we put in a lot of spawns, which there's some footage of earlier. I'll play this footage again, right? But we put in like 40 medium spawns a bait, just boilie only. And it went all around the weed on the outside, right? And the next morning, they were smashing the bait on the gravel. So it was almost as if if you've got a clear spot and there's weed on the outside, they're very wary of the clear spot. The more bait you put in round the weed, the more they kind of learn to become comfortable with the gravel in the middle.
Yeah, because the bait in the middle has been there longer.
Yeah.
So it's washing out in this wreck. So this is where the whole flavour thing and the attraction thing comes in, because I think a lot of people just go overboard, and this goes back to the washing out of the boilies. It takes 24, 48 hours for them to sort of find that bait palatable in loose terms and not over flavored, and two, it just appears safer to them.
Yeah.
So what I would really like to see is take away all that bait and put 2 feeders there, one on worm and one on maggot.
Yeah.
Because this is such an artificial environment for these fish. They wouldn't. Yes, they might come across this.
Yes, it is, but they're also. It is, but I would also say that these are highly pressured tench. They're not pressured. They're not directly targeted, but they are caught pretty often by carp anglers, obviously by accident.
Yeah.
In terms of the rigs, right, generally, right, you need to remember I'm not a tench angler, right? So what carp anglers think is that tench anglers basically just use almost the same setup as us, but it's just a smaller hook, right? What is a standard tench setup in terms of lead, hook length, hook size? But you guys, am I right in thinking you guys are generally 9 times out of 10, your bait is on the hook rather than on a hair?
Not necessarily. It's. I mean, the worm kebab is a classic example. I mean, that technically is a hair, although it's not made out of braid. It's just an extension of the monofilament or the fluorocarbon that you're using. And we use D-rigs a lot. I don't know if you can see this because I can't see myself. I can see Phil, but I don't know if you can see this. This was just happened to be on the kitchen table for some reason, reminding me to make up a couple of rigs, I think. This is just 3 D-rig casters on a size 10, and that's about a 3-inch fluoro hook link. And that rig caught me a 39-pound 14 carp out of horseshoe. And that's that's the sort of thing I'm very fond of casters. I don't use them on the hook. These are plastic casters, and I'll fish them with a PVA bag, or you can fish them in a feeder with some chopped worm. Other people like maggots, but they won't necessarily use live maggots on the hook. They might put 2 or 3 artificial buoyant maggots on a hair or a D-rig and have 1 or 2 live maggots on the hook.
So can you just hold that? Can you hold that up again, Colin, just to show us?
Can you see that? I can't see myself, so I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, so just move it more towards the centre. So, yeah, up a touch. Right, there you go. We can see it perfect now. Right, so that is short. That's about 3 inches.
Yeah.
That's about 3 inches. But
Yeah.
that is fairly typical, especially if you're using something like an inline lead. I mean, there are, but you see, that's no different really to a chod link that carp anglers are using. I mean, most chod links are 3 to 4 inches, and the whole point of a chod link is just to give you something that's sitting near the bottom on chod.
Yeah.
On this sort of situation. So really, all we're doing is using that with something like an inline feeder or on a helicopter.
Yeah.
And then we might, and these are buoyant maggots, and this is effectively neutral buoyancy. So this would, once the feeder's going to hit the bottom, and that's just going to slow down and fall. It will obviously go straight to the bottom with the feeder, but then those 3 maggots will just rest gently on top of this silk rig with a degree of buoyancy. And if a tench is going along, feeding on top of the weed, you probably can't see that because, as you've seen, they're taking in mouthfuls of weed.
Yeah.
So that's the type of rig I would probably use in that situation.
So like this one here, right? So this fish, like, it spat out more than it picked up. Like, are they storing almost like a gerbil or a hamster? Like, are they taking a mouthful of bait, storing some of it here, and then sometimes they're taking another mouthful and they've still got some in here, and when they go to eject, they're actually ejecting in some cases 2 mouthfuls.
Oh, it could well be. It's a bit like eating cherries. I mean, most people, if they're eating cherries, they'll have 2 or 3 cherries, spit out the pips, and then eat the flesh.
Yeah.
I mean, this could well be what they're doing. There's no reason why they shouldn't do that.
So in terms of what I'd love to know from you guys is, right, if I end up in another situation like this and I'm on another lake and I've got the tench coming in, I'm there for 4 or 5 days filming, and the tench start coming in the first night and they start smashing up the spot, what kind of questions would you want answered in terms of rigs, baits, presentations, and how the fish behave to those? Like, what would you guys want to see?
I'd like to see the sort of presentations that we're currently using at this time of year, which is things like worm kebab, maggot feeders, that sort of presentation. Because it's, the tench fishing, as I mentioned earlier on, this whole, it's often called sort of, mini carp tactics or light carp tactics. But despite all this sort of super wonderful carp bait that is available in terms of boilies and pellets and so on, we catch an awful lot of our fish this time of year on natural baits. And invariably, in my experience, and I think a lot of other members of the Tenchfishers, we don't really consider using boilies or pellets on the hook. You might do on a sort of hungry water or a commercial water. But where we're fishing relatively, places like Linear, where you've got waters of 10 to 50 acres, gravel pits, even with the amount of you imagine the amount of boilie that must be going into Linear throughout the year. And if then these super duper, highly nutritious, beneficial baits, but they're not necessarily, they're catching some tench on chod rigs and small pop-ups, but as you can see, they're not really feeding. You've got these 10mm boilies, which you might think, well, okay, that's more the size that the tench might pick up, but they're not really feeding on these super wonderful baits. They're picking up. I think they're being quite selective. They can't be selective when they're over. They've got a mixture in the palm of your hand. You've got boilie, corn, maggot. They can't selectively easily pick out the maggots. They don't have that sort of control. They can pick up a mouthful.
Do you know what? Right, what you need to remember here is, right, I've watched 100 times more than what yous have watched. Right?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
I didn't record all the tench footage, right, because I would have ended up with a 60-hour movie, right? So I just recorded. So at some points where there was 2 or 3 tench coming in, I wasn't even recording. I was just sitting watching. I didn't see any bait winning against any other bait. Maggots didn't beat Pellet. Pellet didn't beat Colin. Colin didn't beat Boilie. Boilie didn't beat Maggot. Genuinely, it was, yeah, they definitely didn't avoid the Boilies. They
No,
definitely
I'm not saying they
didn't
didn't
single them
avoid
out.
them.
But what I was curious to know was, I think the point that you were making was, obviously because this is a carp water, it's getting large volumes of boilies. So have the fish became attuned to the boilies because it's a carp lake? And in a situation where you went onto a more tench specific lake, would they spook off the boilies or not know what they are?
Well, I think they know what they are, but I think they are more tuned in to feeding naturally than the carp are. I think the carp is probably. I think this Farlows is a sort of, it's heavily fished. Compared to the number of tench, I don't know how many tench are in there. This could be the entire population of Farlows, but I suspect there's an awful lot of carp in Farlows. It's not a low stock gravel bit, is it, by any stretch of the imagination?
No,
It's a sort
no.
of, it's got a good head of carp, and those carp have almost lost the habit of how to feed naturally. I mean, there will be some. I mean, Rod Hutchison was always of the opinion that there are some carp that always feed on bloodworm and don't feed on anything else, and they'll never get caught on the boilie. But these carp who have come from fish farms have probably never seen a boilie, never seen a bloodworm till they get put in the gravel pit at 2 to 3 years old. Food to them means pellet. That's what they're fed as soon as they're big enough to take it. And even then, they'll have live food for the first couple of months. And as soon as they come off the live food, they're going on to sort of micro pellets, like, 0.5 salmon fry type size, less than a millimeter. And then they'll just take them up into larger size pellet. That's all they feed them. And they're from day naught these days. In most of these catch and release carp fisheries, they are undoubtedly have been weaned on to this bait, which is not a million miles different to what they've been fed on when they were on a fish farm.
Yeah. Well, as I say, I've got enough footage there that I'm going to edit, and I'll put it over the top, and I'll get it online, and you guys can share it, whatever. But yeah, I definitely want to. It would be good to see Tench again. I've developed a soft spot for Tench, having watched them for like 60 hours, and they are like pretty majestic, and like they are. It is really cool to see. Like in this shot here, you'll see. Look at that bait; it's sitting perfectly on top of the weed, and yet the fish comes in and just noses straight into the bait. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
But, so someone once said to me, if you saw a sausage hovering 3 feet above your breakfast, you'd think something was wrong, wouldn't you? I
yeah,
mean,
yeah. But I would still eat
it's
it.
such an unnatural presentation, really.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like that pink pop up there. Like you can see the fish. That fish knows that's a rig, 100%. Like they can. I think because they're so slow as well, they can see the hook underneath the rig, and they never touched it. And the one that did touch it, I think the bite's actually coming up soon. The one that did touch it, yeah, you'll see it here, right? If you actually watch closely, part of me thinks that this fish didn't mean to pick up the hook bait. I actually think it was an accident, because you'll see the pop-up sits here and the fish goes to nose down and almost sucks by accident. There's actually a close-up of it. So after I show you it the first time, you'll see it's tilting its tail. It starts to tilt its tail up. It looks like it's going down to the lake bed, and that hook bait just slips under the top lip by accident.
Right. Yeah.
So I actually think that was a foul take, if you like.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for coming on, and yeah, drop me a message if you've got anything. If you've got any like rigs or whatever that you want me to test in front of the camera, if there is a situation where I've got tench feeding, then I'll maybe put out a tench rig just so you guys can see how they react
Yeah.
to it. If there's a day where there's no carp action and the tench are coming in and smashing me, then I might as well, get your rigs out and see how they react, how good they
Yeah.
are.
No, it's very interesting. Lovely photography. I think I've seen more tench videos since I've discovered this, because there isn't much around at all.
Oh, I know.
There's very little. You might get a little bit on carp videos occasionally when tench come in, but you don't often see that sort of footage where you've got a good number of tench feeding very casually and relaxed with a frame of mind. So
what was actually good, Colin, was, although it was sad, right? But I was desperate to hook the tench that had the rig in its mouth, right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Just so that I could clear the rig.
Yeah.
But in actual fact, it was good to have that fish because we could identify it.
Yeah.
So although we were getting between 12 and 14 tench in every morning, I think it was the same 12 or 14 because that fish was there every morning.
Yeah.
And because the rig was there, we used the rig to identify that, oh, that's the same fish that comes in.
Yeah.
We could see the patterns in it. Whereas if that fish didn't have a rig in its mouth, you're looking and you're going, it could be 12 fish one morning and a different 12 the next morning. Thanks very much for your time, boys. And I'll drop you a message once I've got the video edited and you can let me know what you think.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, thanks very much,
John.
boys.